Hey everybody. In this video, I want to talk to you a little bit about seasteading. Seasteading is the idea of going out onto the ocean and establishing a settlement. And you can do this by building a floating platform or by using a boat. Um, and you would want to do this to create your own country. Okay, that's the basic idea, and this concept is promoted by the Seasteading Institute, and they are at seasteading.org. Um, I've been aware of them for a while. I've always been interested in ways of establishing more independence for myself, and ever since I was young, I dreamed of creating my own country. And actually, when I was in sixth grade, I remember proposing the idea of building some sort of floating island out on the ocean in order to create a new country. And I don't remember the context in which this came up, but I was discussing it with my teacher in front of the whole class, and he was really he saw me as weird, I think, for proposing this idea. I was asking if it was possible to do this, and he couldn't directly answer my question, and he seemed weirded out by it. I think kids might have been laughing or something. But anyway, now we have the Seasteading Institute, so I guess I feel a little bit vindicated. Anyway, like I said, I've been aware of them for a while, and I was recently reminded of them because Joe Rogan did a podcast with Joe Quirk. Joe Quirk is the spokesman for the Seasteading Institute, and it's a really interesting video. It's up on YouTube, and if you just put in Joe Rogan and Joe Quirk into Google or into the YouTube search box, it should come up. It's good because it's over 2 hours and they really go in depth on this whole idea. So in watching this video, I basically had a few thoughts that I wanted to share. There are two basic arguments that Joe Quirk and the Seasteading Institute give for why it's beneficial to create new countries out on the water. The first argument has to do with frontiers. The basic argument is that frontiers throughout history have been helpful in establishing new forms of government. Okay, so take for example the United States. The United States was instrumental in introducing representative democracy to the world. This is now, I guess you could say, the predominant governmental system in the world. And it would have been very difficult, according to Joe Quirk, to do this in Europe, right? I mean, a lot of Europeans had ideas about representative democracy, but I mean, how were they going to institute this? It would have been too hard to overthrow the monarchs right away. So what happened was they experimented with it where there was no government really, which was in the New World. Okay, and this opportunity to experiment basically gave everyone the opportunity to see how representative democracy can work better than monarchy. And then once it was clear that representative democracy worked better than monarchy, there could be revolutions. Okay, so I think that their basic idea is that now that all the land is settled, we can go out onto the ocean and we can make that the new frontier. And when we go out onto the ocean where there's no government there, we can experiment with new governments, and we can find a government that works better for the 21st century. And Joe Quirk is quick to point out that we could do this peacefully. Okay, in order to experiment with a new government here in America, we would have to overthrow the current government, which would be violent, right? It would involve some sort of violent revolution. So yeah, exploring a new frontier is probably a better way of experimenting with government. So I buy into that argument. I don't necessarily think that we're going to be able to find a system of government that works in the way that we might want it to. I mean, there are a lot of problems that people have with government. Human nature is going to be human nature wherever you go. So, I mean, even if you have a new frontier and new experimentation, it's not necessarily going to result in something great, but it can. So if their argument is just that frontiers offer the opportunity for exploration, and that's good because it gives us a chance of improving our lives with better government, then that's fine. That's a great argument, and I buy into it. But there's another argument that the Seasteading Institute makes, which I don't really buy into as much, or I'm more skeptical about, and that is the idea that life on the ocean will be fundamentally different than life on the land because of how people can vote with their boat, so to speak. And the idea of voting with your boat is that people are going to have settlements or boats or seasteads, whatever, that are easily movable. Okay, you have a fluid ocean, so your vessel, your platform, whatever, can be moved. Unlike a house, which is anchored to the earth, obviously. So if you are in a settlement, like a larger jurisdiction, and you don't like the rules of that jurisdiction, you can just move. And if you move, or there's the threat of moving, then that puts pressure on each individual jurisdiction out in the ocean to cater to people. Okay, so if there's a group or a person who controls a certain area of the ocean, or who controls a certain, I don't know, large docking platform that people can attach to, they're going to be more likely to try to create a system of government that works for people, because they're going to be afraid of people leaving. And this is supposed to this is supposed to help us create the great systems of government. You know, this is supposed to make governments like cell phones. Okay, in the video that I mentioned with Joe Rogan and Joe Quirk, I think it was Joe Quirk who was talking about how there's a lot of competition when it comes to cell phones. You know, and because of that, there's always new innovation. But since there's not a lot of competition when it comes to governments, there isn't so much innovation. You know, you can't just choose your government like you can choose your cell phone. So, well, that's the way it is on land, but they're saying it's going to be different out on the water. Okay, so why don't I buy into this? I'm skeptical about it because it just seems like, well, they're making a flawed comparison. They're saying, or a flawed contrast, I should say. They're saying that things are different on land than they are on the water, but you can move on the land, right? If it's so advantageous to be able to move from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, why don't people just have Winnebagos or something? You know, why don't people get mobile on the land and then vote with their Winnebagos instead of voting with their boats? Okay, well, maybe they don't do this because there's really no point to it. You know, in the United States, we have a bunch of different states. We have a bunch of different jurisdictions, but they're pretty much the same. I mean, there are definitely differences between them, but if you were to move from, say, New York to Florida, you'd be faced with a similar situation. You would be faced with a similar government, right? You would have a governor, you would have a state house, a state Senate, I think, and you would have the judicial system, and all the states they basically use the same system. I don't know if they can change that. I'm not even really sure, to be honest with you. But either way, you're faced with a similar lifestyle in all the different jurisdictions in the United States. So to have this lifestyle where you're constantly moving would be pointless. So maybe that's the way it would develop ultimately out on the ocean. You would have a certain culture running through all the different seasteads or jurisdictions where they're doing things basically the same way. So, it's not even going to make a difference that you can move from one seastead area to the next, and maybe people would abandon that ability. They don't even necessarily have to have that ability, by the way. They could just get like little condos on a larger seastead, which is something that Joe Rogan actually pointed out in the podcast. So yeah, I mean, it's just it's not clear to me that things are fundamentally different on the land versus the ocean, because again, it seems like you can move around on the land, and I mean, you can move from house to house as well, right? So it's not impossibly expensive to move from one state to another. I mean, I moved from New York to Florida, so it's possible to make a move. So I mean, and then on the land you have jurisdictions that are all the same, and I mean they're supposed to be competing with each other. So why isn't there this like huge difference between all of them? Anyway, it also occurs to me that there can be things on the ocean that will keep people put. Let's say that you have a bunch of people who are clustered around a jurisdiction, or clustered in a jurisdiction, and they're there because they have a job on some kind of main platform that everybody goes to. Like everybody has their own individual boat or individual seastead, but then they all go to work on this main factory platform. Well, if that's the case, they're not going to want to move. So it's not going to be as fluid as Joe Quirk necessarily suggests. And also, Joe Rogan makes 2 points in his podcast that are interesting to me. One of them I already mentioned. People might have condos. They might all just be on one main seastead, like a city-stead or something like that. It might keep them tied down instead of giving them the ability to be fluid in their movements. And then Joe Rogan also points out that they might have kids who might be in school, and then parents might not want to uproot their kids. In addition to that, I've also thought of the idea that once the jurisdictions get established on the ocean, they might be very much like different countries on land, in that they might have immigration rules. So just in the same way that I can't just pick up and go to Australia, there might be people who want to move to a different seasteading jurisdiction, but they can't because they're not citizens of that jurisdiction. And those jurisdictions won't just let them in. And furthermore, even if people are able to just move around completely freely, their choices might become more and more limited. So people, I think, have a tendency to centralize. I think that actually you saw that in early American history. We originally had the Articles of Confederation, and um, these Articles of Confederation didn't even have taxing powers. Like the states didn't even have to pay, or people in the states didn't even have to necessarily pay federal taxes. So it was very difficult to fund the federal government. So they created a constitution, the constitution that we have now, and that provided taxing powers. So it can become necessary to have a more centralized power sometimes, or people can feel like it's necessary. So what happens if people feel like it's necessary out on the ocean? Okay, well, then you're going to have maybe just a couple of centralized federations out on the ocean, and they might be very similar. So you can move from jurisdiction 1 to jurisdiction 2 to jurisdiction 3, and then like that's about it. Okay, that could be the way that it evolves. And then if that's the case, well, is fluidity of movement really going to matter at that point? Maybe not. Maybe not. So I am really skeptical about the idea that you can just put pressure on that you could just put pressure on people to create good governments. Isn't there enough pressure on land? I mean, you would think that there would be. I mean, people want good government. People have the ability to vote. They don't really use it that much. People they can move from one country to another. I mean, I noticed earlier that it's kind of difficult. I can't just pick up and move to Australia, but I can apply to move to Australia. It's not impossible, so there is a moderate amount of pressure on land, and I feel like that's basically the way that it would be out on the ocean as well. So I don't know. I really question this idea that there's a fundamental difference, and really probably the most important thing to me is that human nature is going to be the same even out on the ocean. So I think that the way that we behave on land is going to be similar to the way that we behave on the ocean. It's like you want to avoid wars. Well, human nature helps create wars. It's not just governments. It's not just, the idea that we have centralized governments that can tax us, and and there are presidents that can start wars just sort of on their own volition. It's not just that, right? Human beings kind of get behind all this. We form up into groups, and we want to fight each other. It seems like there's a lot of hatred, for instance, in Israel for the Palestinians. Okay, it's not just the centralized government that's doing it. There's some popular support for it. There's corruption in our system. That's another problem. Right now we have corporations and extremely rich people buying off our politicians. Is that going to happen out on the ocean? Well, I would think so. I mean, how are we going to stop rich people out on the ocean from buying off people who control the seasteading jurisdictions, right? How's corruption going to be avoided? And it's not clear how being out on the ocean is going to stop that. Like the fluidity of movement is not going to stop that necessarily. The problem with corruption is that there's money concentrated in people's hands, and they can use that money to bribe governments. That's the fundamental nature of the problem, and that problem can exist out on the ocean as well. Overregulation. Some people have a problem with overregulation, so they might want to move out onto the ocean for that. I mean, that's something that was mentioned in the video with Joe Rogan and Joe Quirk. Let's see. I mean, human beings have, I think, this tendency to think that they can control things with regulation, right? I mean, the first thought that everybody has when there's a problem is, let's fix it. Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's do something active to try to fix it, instead of just, letting the chips fall where they may. So, if it's part of human nature to try to regulate, then maybe people are going to make that same mistake out on the ocean. I don't know. So I guess I am skeptical, but I don't want to make it seem like I'm attacking the Seasteading Institute. I think that they are really interesting. I'm going to continue to follow them. I'm going to continue to try to stay updated on what they do. And I really hope that they can come up with something interesting. I think that I think that they can. I think that they can, and I think that it's possible, and it's fine to try, but I'm just not entirely convinced. And I don't know if Joe Quirk is entirely convinced. I don't know if everybody who's involved with the seasteading movement is entirely convinced that it can really work. But while I don't have a problem with them giving it a try, I guess I would have a problem with them saying that it is necessarily going to work, or there's a great chance that it is going to work, because that's not clear to me at all. Okay, so I guess that's pretty much what I have to say. Thank you for watching this video, and if you'd like to communicate with me, you can leave comments below, or you can email me at MichaelStreejan@gmail.com, or you can talk to me on Twitter at MichaelStreejan. Thank you for watching. See you later.